Well, good morning to you, Desiree, Naledi, and the viewers at home. Of course, I'm coming to you live from the Gauteng High Court in Pretoria, where the Democratic Alliance has hauled the ANC to this court to challenge its cadre deployment policy. I think this is the first time that we're seeing a political party take another political party to court to challenge that very political party's own internal policy. Now, over the coming years, it's been a critical time for the country as we're experiencing the after effects, if I could phrase it that way, of the failure of state-owned enterprises to perform in this country and deliver the basics of service delivery. We've seen it with rolling blackouts, to name a few. Those are the after effects of some of these failures to keep these state-owned enterprises together. So now what the DA is saying essentially in its application is that it wants this cadre deployment policy to be abolished, declared unconstitutional, invalid and unlawful. The DA is arguing before this court, it's a full bench here at the Gauteng High Court in Pretoria, that the root of the failure of these SOEs in this country can be attributed to this particular policy. When Day One came here, we heard evidence stating that when you look at some of the deployments that are made, they're alleging that there is this committee that sits within the ANC and recommends. Now, we heard that those recommendations aren't final or binding, but we see that some of the people that have been favored by the ANC, that is the DA's argument, have been brought into these state-owned entities. And the DA, which has described it as a cancer or an evil of sorts in these SOEs, is saying that if we want to perform better as a country, then that policy needs to be abolished in totality, and that those who are put into these key strategic positions needs to be based off a meritocracy-based approach. So those who are skilled and those who are qualified to get into those facilities and do the job that needs to be done. Of course, we did hear a bit of the ANC's response. The ANC is opposing this application. They've argued that there isn't much of a jurisdiction for the courts to discuss the internal policies of a political party, and they've argued that there is a difference actually between state and party, and that what is discussed in the party decisions, the DA has not brought evidence forward to show that what has happened in those committee meetings has transpired or has interfered or influenced what takes place in the state. So now we understand that there are several other respondents. There are about 6 respondents that we've heard from the ANC. There'll be 5 more today that will respond to the DA's application, quite an ambitious, historic application to now take another political party to court and say that we want this policy abolished so that we can have a better service delivery for South Africans. They've argued that they have standing because as the official opposition in the country, they represent quite a number of citizens that are adversely impacted by the failure of these SOEs to act. So from 9:30 a.m. this morning, we'll continue to hear those arguments regarding whether this policy is constitutional or not, and whether this court should intervene and actually declare it unconstitutional and invalid, and what the alternative would be to recruiting different individuals for these SOEs so that they can perform better and in turn create a better quality of life for all South Africans as a whole.
Kenny, what are we hearing from the African National Congress with regards to this process?
Well, the African National Congress, the ANC's main argument is that the DA is trying to limit their right to freedom of expression. They're stating that the DA hasn't put evidence forth in this court to say that what has been discussed in that committee meetings for cadre deployment is what actually transpires in the state. They've actually said that they enjoy freedom of expression in the form of political choices, stating that the ANC has a right to say who would they like in a particular position. But it's not a dictation. It's not something that they're saying that if the ANC says they have a couple of names that they would like to deploy, that will be the reality that turns out when those appointments are made in that public sector. So those are the arguments that the ANC has given in totality. They've said that from the 1950s, that's decades on, they've had this cadre deployment policy, and it hasn't been an issue before. And that you cannot, the argument rather, it isn't sound to say that if you look at these SOEs, that the root cause of it is the ANC and its cadre deployment policy. There's also a bit of a discussion of whether it is the policy itself, so legislation, or human conduct, where we see the error taking place with response to the failure of SOEs to act in creating a better quality of life. So the DA also has to advance that argument and respond to the ANC's claim that what takes place in the policy is not exactly unconstitutional, but maybe there could possibly be an argument for the human conduct that may follow afterwards. But we'll be able to hear from fellow other respondents as well how they're looking at this dichotomy between state and political party, as well as legislation and human conduct going forward with regards to cadre deployment.
Of course, an important process that we're following, but just remember that it's a busy week for the Democratic Alliance tomorrow. Today they're at the courts. Today they have that March Tuli House, just with regards to the machinations at Eskom.